2011 Chevy Cruze with the big 1.4 engine in it, but it's turbocharged. Check engine lights on. Customer's already informed me it has a P0171. I've confirmed it. You guys come with me. Alright, I'm going to start off with this is about diagnostic process. Something we hear a lot about, and something I'm still trying to fine tune. Getting into, as our friend Brandon Steckler would say, the diagnostic funnel, which sometimes looks a lot like a rabbit hole. This is a screenshot I took. Let me back up. I did start troubleshooting this. I stopped. I don't quite know what's wrong with it yet, but I'm in a good direction, and that's why I backed up and I bring you guys along. In lieu of filming a whole lot of stuff and finding out it's going nowhere, and then I wasted time and effort. So I did verify the 171. My process is pull up fuel trims, pull up O2 function, pull up mass airflow data. The first thing I noticed, this was the first screen I pulled up. I had good O2 function, front and rear. My rear was sitting nicely at like 740 millivolts. The front O2 sensor was switching fine. Rich lean, I could richen it, I could lean it. This was my issue. My long-term fuel trim was locked in at 35%. My short-term was single digits. I can kind of get it into the teens. It would float back down. I tried raising the throttle 2,000 RPM, see if it would go away, if I could zero it at a higher RPM, which would indicate more of a vacuum leak. But it wasn't behaving right. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. But this is what bothered me, and the answer to this is, when it gets to that point, it locks in. And that's what happened. What I needed to do is, in this case, I needed to go back into, if I can do this with you. Let's see, come on. No, let's go back one more. Let's go back in here. Let's go back out. Blah, blah, blah. This is not where I want it to be. Fuel trim reset. Do the fuel trim reset. In fact, I might even need to do it now. This was locked in at 35. This was doing nothing. This was actually behaving normally. I was getting 2 to 4%. Right now it's working perfectly. Let's reset it. When I did that, now my short term started responding the same way it is right now, which allowed me to continue with my test. So the first thing I want to do is raise up the RPM, see if we can zero this back out. And there you go. I come off the throttle, I close the throttle plate, which now builds vacuum in the intake. And if my numbers start to increase, which they are, which start to indicate, which would lead me in the direction of a leak between the mass airflow sensor towards the engine. If that makes any sense. This is similar to the other video I had where it had a leaky fuel injector. I was doing the same thing. My only interesting takeaway on this so far is this long term that tends to lock out at 30-35%, and then it starts to skew to short term numbers. That's my point with this. So, if I can go back, if this will make sense. We're back. Short term, long term. I don't really need my averages. It's cute that it's there. O2 sensor function. Mass airflow, although it's not probably necessary. This is the computer trying to compensate for a heavy leak. It's maxing out in the long term, which allows the short term to compensate It's probably the wrong terminology. A little better. Because as you can see, when I clear the long term, when I clear the fuel trims, my short term takes off. Which makes troubleshooting it right now a little difficult. Because I can't get that number to respond. I got to clear that number to watch that number respond. Now let's see if I can do this. What I'm getting is when you clear the fuel trim, this long term will go to 0, single digits. My short term will now start to climb into the teens or 20s. When I hit the throttle and open the plate and dump vacuum in the intake, this number now goes to 0. So now I end up with a single digit total fuel trim. As this number creeps up, this number starts to normalize. Right now we have a total fuel trim of about 27 to 30%. But I can still do the same test. I'm just looking at the numbers differently. What I'm looking at is, can I change total fuel trim by applying the throttle, right? So, let me back off a second. We have total fuel trim 29, 30. I'm going to give it about 2,000 RPM. I now go negative 11 on the short term. I'm 18 on long term. So yes, I pulled my total fuel trim back into single digits. What does that tell me? We most likely have an intake leak. I think the point of that whole rant was that you can't always look at just the short-term fuel trim when you're trying to find a PO, a lean condition or a vacuum leak or whatever it is. You can't always look at the short term. You have to look at total trim. Because in this case, we just saw, it's compensating with the long term. Anyway, what I have done under here, I wanted to see if light, camera. My first thought always is purge valve, because they're easy to get to and they're super common. And it's pulsing like crazy. So it is working. If the ECM's trying to control it, it is trying to purge right now. That doesn't mean it's not bad. It doesn't mean that, okay, it's pulling for 5% or 10% and that purge valve is stuck wide open and pulling all kinds of vacuum. I don't think so, because of what we saw on the scan data, that when I opened the throttle, if it was just a purge valve, when I applied throttle, that number wouldn't have changed. But I want to check it anyway, because I'm goofy like that. What I will do is I'll go back. I did disconnect it. I put my vacuum gauge on there. I do want to see if I can, let's do a purge seal. Now let's at least make sure that purge valve does seal. Seal system. You can hear it. It shut off the purge valve. Here's my issue. We're still pulling vacuum through the purge valve. I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to electrically disconnect it. Come on. Come on. And I'm still pulling 20 inches of vacuum through the purge valve. And it's disconnected. Only thing I'm going to want to make sure is if that's normally open or closed. And I believe, unless there's something changed, I believe that's supposed to be normally closed. So that thing shouldn't be drawing any vacuum. So right off the bat, I'll verify it, but I think it needs a purge valve. Let's go one step further, because what we don't have is, I still don't know why, we have a fuel trim response when I hit the throttle. So we're going to go back, live data, fuel trim. My puppy's out there crying. He hears me talking. He thinks somebody else is in here with me. He wants to hang out. Short term. Let's just do short term, long term. Let's just show these two. Let's even graph it. Slow it down a bit. Let's grab a good old carb cleaner. Let's get this in a better spot so we can all see it. You, me, everybody. See the negative numbers? Watch it come back up. Right now we have total fuel trim of about 23, 26. Little carburetor cleaner in the back of the intake. There's 4 injectors back there. We have the intake. I'm just going to spray it along here. Total fuel trim of about 2. Nope, 0. You see where I'm going with this, right? Starting to guess there's a little bit of a leak back here somewhere. Diagnostic process. What's next? I'm going to smoke this thing, I think. I think that's going to be the best way. Hey. Hey, dog. The big boy. Here, you want your toy? Nope. He just wants to hang out in the shop. Say hi. Okay. He's just going to hang out with me. You can't stay in here. You're going to get dirty. Alright? Hey, want the toy? Nope. Alright, say goodbye. Hey, Hunter. Want to go hunt deer? Want to go looking for deer? Yeah. Alright, under the heading of follow your own advice, what I didn't do was check the bulletins before I started. And that's something we always preach. My mistake. I took it for granted. I just figure it out and I don't need to go and look at bulletins or look up on Identifix. On the same token, I didn't want to go on Identifix or something like that and get led down the wrong path at the suggestion of somebody else's findings. But I did smoke it out. And if I would have checked the bulletins first, I would have saved myself a little time, because there is a bulletin on the PCV valve for leaking. There's also a bulletin on the intake manifold, making sure there's a valve inside there's supposed to be a valve inside the intake, and there's another one on the other side of the line inside the turbo. If it's missing the valve, they want you to replace the intake. I don't know if you can see that. But that PCV valve is leaking. I probably would have found it a lot sooner if I had just gone straight to the bulletin. But live and learn. So let me shut this off. Additionally, like I said, there's supposed to be a check valve in here. It's missing. It's not there. This is obviously the original style. They've changed the style of the PCV valve. There's also a high failure rate on this hose that wraps around to the turbo. So I'm going to recommend this hose as well. It's going to get an intake manifold. It's going to get a valve cover. The PCV valve is integral to the valve cover, which looks like it's leaking anyway, so it's not the worst thing. That's about it. Lesson learned. Check the bulletins first. Could have saved myself a few minutes here. That's it for now. This thing's going to go back together for now because I got to order the stuff. I'm not going to have time to do it right this second. I got to pull this out. I got my uncle outside waiting for some struts. I got to get him in. So I'll continue when I get the parts and I get the approval, and I'll bring you guys along.